Hello, everyone. Welcome to our new episode of our program Consciousness in Evolution, a program from Reaprendência International, which aims to present and discuss some essential themes of conscientiology and also to bring some current subjects and themes that might interest to people who are looking for personal growth, self-re-education, parapsychism development, and also to master their own bioenergies. Okay, so our discussions happen under the lens of the consciential paradigm, and we are live from our channels at YouTube and also Facebook. And I hope today that we are going to have a great subject. I'm sure we will have it because we invited a very special guest that is Kim McCaul. And Kim McCaul is a researcher of conscientiology and anthropologist. And he's going to talk about a very important and interesting topic that is the para-reurbanisation and the colonization of Australian Aboriginal cultures. Well, so we are eager to bring our guest to the studio. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you, Eliana.
So thank you very much for being here with us. And I will read his small resume, a summary of his resume that is Kim McCaul is a consulting anthropologist and a linguist with over 20 years of working in the fields of Aboriginal land rights and heritage. He has been studying and volunteering in conscientiology since 1997 and run classes and workshops in the discipline in several countries. He is the author of Multidimensional Evolution, Personal Explorations of Consciousness, and host of the Multidimensional Evolution podcast. Kim McCaul is a consulting anthropologist and oh, that's it. We came to the end because it's a very brief resume of what you have been doing. So, Kim, it's a pleasure to have you here, and we can get started because we have so much to talk about. And I also intend to talk about a little bit about the Australasian Pacific Conference. Okay, so I will put the slides in our for our viewers to see. Just a second. Okay. Here we go.
Thank you, Eliana, and hello, everybody who is watching, either right now. If you're here right now, I hope we get to have a bit of an exchange, engage with some of your questions and comments and ideas. And if you're watching this at a later date, of course, I hope you also find it thought-provoking and inspiring. And I've just lost the slides again, Eliana. I can't see the slides anymore.
Okay, here we go.
So the topic today really combines a few of my passions. I'm an anthropologist. I've worked with Aboriginal people for a long time, and I really value a perspective of multidimensionality when we're looking at life, human life. I value it for myself, for our own personal growth, but I also think as an anthropologist, it's very important and interesting for us and helpful for us to try and understand large social transformations and changes from a multidimensional perspective and think about cultures as multidimensional assemblages of consciousness. And so in this brief presentation, I'm going to try and touch on all of these topics in a way that will try and make them accessible, even though they're quite extensive in themselves. You could write books about each one of these topics. You could write multiple books about them. So, of course, we've got an hour here to share them. And just an opening comment about this image in the background. This is artwork from the Kimberley region in far northwest Australia, and it represents the original creator beings who shaped the landscape in the perspective of the local traditional owners of that land. And it speaks to a really ancient and solidly grounded tradition that's really relevant to what we'll be talking about today. So there are a few key points that I'm touching on in this presentation. I'll start with fundamental principles to make clear the perspective from which I'm coming in this talk. I will then set out the basic elements of para-reurbanisation, what that means, and how we understand the process. I'll then touch on the process of colonisation of Australia and what that meant and continues to mean for the original inhabitants of this continent, and then consider parallels and differences between para-reurbanisation and colonisation. And as I explained, para-reurbanisation, if you're not familiar with that term, as I explained, you might start to see how it might relate, why there might be parallels between that and the process of colonisation. So probably the most fundamental principle of all that I haven't listed there in the bullet points is that we are all consciousness. Every single individual right now here listening in a physical body, wherever you are in the world, you are a consciousness manifesting in your current identity, your current personality. But beneath, beyond that personality, is an essence that transcends this life, that has had many other lives, and that will continue to have other existences and personalities in the physical dimension into the future, and eventually will continue to manifest itself in other dimensions. And so everything we're talking about is from the perspective of this essence, right? If we start focusing our analysis on that, it really changes the way we think about life individually and collectively. Now, collectively, we are all connected. Every single one around the world right now is in one way or another energetically connected with each other. And I'm sure many of you listening have had this experience of being connected with another person, right? You have the experience of knowing somebody's going to call you before they call. You have the experience of you thinking about a certain item. Like the other day, I was thinking, oh, I should need to ask this guy to send me something. And 5 minutes later, he messaged me and said, here's this thing that, send me this image that I needed. These kinds of experiences happen quite regularly. But beyond that, we are actually energetically connected with all other beings on this planet. That's very lot. That's a lot. That's a very big thing, and we can't actually process that a lot of the time, right? We can't keep that in our consciousness unless we have something like a cosmic consciousness expansive experience. That's a common theme of those experiences, is an awareness of being part of this connectedness of life, of this connectedness of all of consciousness. Within this collective, let's just focus on planet Earth right now, physically and extra-physically. Within this collective, we are more associated with certain consciousnesses, certain groups of consciousness. And that is a result of our own para history, and everybody else is part of that group of our own para history. We've grown together, evolved together, shared lives together. I don't know, I've just become big and the presentation small, but that's fine. And we call these karmic groups. And these karmic groups that we're part of are both physical So a lot of the people here that are connected with each other, that are friends, that have relationships, and some of us haven't even met yet in the physical life, but we're part of a karmic group united through common interests and shared evolutionary trajectory. But we also have many of our colleagues in our karmic group in other dimensions, in extra physical dimensions. They don't have a physical body right now. And we kind of move in some ways, like there will be people in this life that you will never connect with. There will be people in extra physical dimensions that are in other karmic groups that we don't really have many points of contact with. But even so, when we start doing extra physical assistance work, as we'll talk a bit more down the track, it starts bringing us into connection across these divides. So consciousness evolves through sequential intraphysical lives. That idea is not new, right? This idea that we have many different lives, it's old, it's been around for thousands of years. The big focus in conscientiology is that this process of moving through lives is around evolution. And the driver for this evolution is assistance. It's contribution to life, it's contribution to others, and through that, growing in ourselves, because to become more capable to provide assistance to others, we have to overcome our own inner barriers, our own inner obstacles that stop us from that capacity. Another relevant factor, concept to introduce now is the term in conscientiology called the thougene, and the way thocenes bind us to other consciousnesses. So a thoceine is a neologism, and it's comprised of the elements thought, sentiment, and energy. And the idea is that we are manifesting as a consciousness. We are manifesting in this physical life, but also in our other bodies and other dimensions through thoughts, sentiments, and energies together, that they always come together, and we're continuously thocening. We're continuously thinking, feeling, and together generating an energy. And as we do this, we create certain patterns of energy through our thoughts and our emotions, right? Our thocenes. So that becomes a hollow-thocene. A hollow-thocene is the collection of thocenes. It's the pattern. It's like when you go through, you create something, you're going through the same groove, and you're going through the same groove over and over. You create a certain groove, right? In wood, in metal, and whatever you kind of. It's the same with our thoughts and our emotions. We're creating this groove in our energetic presence. It's much more complicated than a single groove, but nonetheless, it follows a certain pattern. And so we have this hollow-thocene, and individually, and we create it with groups of people that we come together with, that we work with, that we move towards common goals with, that we share culture with, and that's a big factor, that we share history with. Countries, cities, communities all have hollow-thocenes built by the community. And then the final point I wanted to make in terms of the fundamental principles is this idea of the continuum of knowledge. So there are, in a sense, you could say that there are not exactly new ideas, but there's kind of always people building on or getting greater clarity around certain ideas. So, for example, when Freud came along with the idea of the Oedipus in psychology, it created a particular understanding, gave a particular focus on human psychology, which had some validity, but it was also too narrow. And then Jung came along with the collective unconscious, which also has validity, but it doesn't address everything. And today we have concepts, sticking with psychology, of different parts of the personality, which can provide a lot of therapeutic benefits, much more nuanced than the work of Jung and Freud, but usually not multidimensional. And then we can have a multidimensional understanding that includes the psychological and also includes extra-physical elements. And so we're always building on different knowledge, and there are many aspects, there are many elements to knowledge that are kind of partial, and we're continuously trying to build on that. And so, for example, we're going to talk about para-reurbanisation. That is a concept that that concept involves the idea that there's profound change happening right now in this planet. And conscientiology is not the only group of people to say that. There are many people that have this sense that there's change happening. Right now, there are many Christian fanatics who are waiting for some major catastrophe to happen in the Middle East, because in their belief, that will bring about the arrival of the Messiah, and right, they're expecting some profound change. It's very misguided, but there is some sense, people have this understanding that something will happen. And then there are many different ideas of the age of Aquarius that started with the New Age ideas and so on. And so what we find in this case, with the model of conscientiology, is that it is much more technical and tries to examine some really complex processes and actually look at the reality of consciousness, look at the reality of the evolution of consciousness, how it unfolds over millennia. So para-reurbanisation. The idea of reurbanisation deals with the degradation of environments, transforming industrial estates into environmentally sustainable housing, reforestation, creating spaces that enhance social interaction, creativity, and community well-being. That's all examples of reurbanisation that we can find in many cities to make the environment more livable. Para-reurbanisation was proposed by Vieira in 2003, and it deals with the improvement of sick, anti-cosmoethical, degraded extra-physical environments and communities. And this process is managed by evolved consciousnesses that in conscientiology we call Homo sapiens serenissimus, a name that reflects one of their profound attributes, which is that of great serenity. And the goal of para-reurbanisation is to heal the intraphysical holothosene in those areas where the intraphysical society is impacted by anti-evolutionary, deleterious effects on humanity by the sick extraphysical communities. So, in other words, this process starts at the level of consciousness, extraphysically, and then over time leads to changes in the physical dimension. In fact, long before Vieira proposed para-reurbanisation, at least publicly, he talked about the pollution of planet Earth being first and foremost a thorsenic pollution, generated and maintained by anti-cosmoethic or unhealthy holothosenes. So when you see that the reality we create, it's really not revolutionary, right? To say the reality we create starts within our mind, it starts in our thought, because that is what drives us to act in the way we do. That is what we need to change. But then when we just have an intraphysical perspective, it can be hard to understand, how do we actually change that? We seem to be stuck. We can't move on. And that is because we don't realize the complex system that we're a part of, which includes billions of other consciousnesses in other dimensions, where they're often very stuck. And so then the last concept I'll just briefly explain, and then Eliana, maybe if you wanted to jump in with anything, you're welcome to. is the idea of consreos and helpers. So consreos is a neologism again, and it's short for reurbanized consciousnesses. So a reurbanized consciousness is a consciousness who was stuck in an extra physical dimension that was not evolutionary. There was stagnant thocenes, stagnant ways of thinking, stagnant way of feeling, and the consciousnesses in that dimension, they couldn't change. And perhaps in that context, it's important to just briefly explain that extraphysical dimensions are first and foremost essentially states of consciousness. They group consciousnesses together based on the way they think and feel. And unlike in the physical dimension, there is generally a lack of contrast. So in the extraphysical dimension, they are what people sometimes call consensus realities. Everybody there shares the same kind of perspective, the same kind of reality. And so people just stay put for, in physical times, can be hundreds of years without moving in any way in terms of their own inner growth. So that's the consreos, are consciousnesses that are taken from those dimensions and brought back to the physical dimension. And the helpers, kind of self-explanatory, that term, is essentially consciousnesses who are lucid, who are very aware of the process of evolution, and who are dedicating their energy to assist other consciousnesses to join in the evolutionary flow, in the evolutionary current once again. And the motivation of helpers, this goes back to the very first point I made about us all being connected. They are very conscious of the fact that they are connected and that they share an essence with the other consciousnesses who are currently stuck. But yeah, Eliana, do you have anything to say or ask? You're muted.
So I can see you are bringing a lot of very important concepts of conscientiology. You spoke about reurbanization and para-reurbanization. That was a term proposed by Dr. Waldo Vieira. You talked about serenissimi, that are more evolved consciousnesses, and also the consciels, that are the reurbanized consciousness, that are brought to resonate, to be born on earth, and they are brought from this more dense extra-physical environments that are more degraded and anti-cosmetical, and that is the para-reurbanization itself. So we are bringing a lot of people to resonate, not we, but the Serenissimi, but we are having this people being born on planet Earth, and so the country, the planet is crowded of these people, and this is something that is good. It doesn't seem good because we have an environment full of issues to be solved everywhere, every country, but it's a sign of reurbanization. And that's the way the Serenissimi deal with this process of bringing those people to be born here to be re-educated, to have more opportunities to evolve. Because when we are in the interphysicality, here this planet works as a school. We are constantly learning and evolving. So you brought also the concept of Tocene, what is the tocenate, and that changes everything because we have a lot of responsibility about what we tocenate. And well, I would like to ask you a question because you are bringing this and you are going to talk about colonization. That's our next topic. And my question is, para-urbanization helps in reconnecting ancient with the new, cure the ills of the past, and do betterments. Do you agree with this affirmation?
Well, I hope so. I hope so. I feel like we're in a process right now where the manifestations of power reurbanization that we're seeing can be quite confronting, because at least through the lens that I'm using, and I think many of us that use power reurbanization as the lens for looking at changes at the moment. A lot of the sort of fanaticism that we're seeing, the radicalization, the rigidity, polarization, it's kind of the themes that you hear a lot about, right, in the media at the moment. You see it in the wars and so on. They are all symptoms or side effects of this process, because consciousnesses in stuck holothoscenes are being reborn in great numbers. And so right now it doesn't look like reconnecting and like curing and so on, right? But I guess the understanding is that that will be the next stage. And I actually find, and I hope this will be clear in this presentation, that if we look at a specific context like Australia, or other countries, but Australia is right where I have the sort of see it as a case study. We can see how reconciliation could look, how two-way learning could look, and those are points I'll get to towards the end. And I think those could be important pieces to the para-reurbanisation puzzle. All right, I'll keep going, and we'll come
Okay.
to that point. So this is just a very simple graph, just to give the idea of the way extra-physical dimensions. So dim and X is the extra-physical dimension. Socin is the intraphysical society. And so here we are just illustrating that there are many extra-physical dimensions, and they are exerting an influence on this dimension. And we don't know this often, right? We're not aware of this. Most of us aren't aware of this. And I was thinking about sort of examples that you can have in your life. You know, if you've ever lived next to a bad neighbor, if you've ever lived next to a neighbor who who was aggressive, or where there was often fighting and shouting happening next door. Not aggressive to you, but just in the way they were, you could hear it, or you could feel it, right? It lives, it creates, it has repercussions. And of course, from the extra-physical dimension, it's more subtle, but actually it's quite pervasive. And so the idea is that our states of mind, our states of consciousness, are influenced by these repercussions from the other dimensions. And para-reurbanisation is in a way about evicting tenants who are giving us bad vibes and replacing it with tenants that will give us good vibes. But these tenants giving us bad vibes are also consciousness as an evolution, right? So where do they go? How is this done in a cosmo-ethical way? This is the struggle. So these are the symptoms of para-reurbanisation that we currently see around us, or that we can see. So there's a shock of rebirth after centuries in stagnant, repetitive, hypnotic holothoscenes. And this shock can lead to these various factors, right? People who are very accident prone, they're antisocial, don't care about the environment. There's an emotional disconnect from other people and from the life and from the earth. Often people might have had very traumatizing past lives. This is why they got stuck. And so there might be life avoidance. They might not be really willing to engage in life again because they're still stuck in a trauma. Often extreme emotional instability, fanatical, fixed thoughtsanity. People are stuck in certain ideas, right and wrong, black and white, very fixed. Stuck in group karmic interprisons, right? People they hate, people they have to fight for, whatever. It's sort of these extreme commitments. Meline is another neologism. This means intraphysical melancholy, premature dysoma, and self-mimicry. People have a tendency to repeat the same thing over and over from the past, from past lives, again in this life and into the future, potentially. Now, we do often, and I think I just did that a few times, I focus on the extreme cases, right? People like that might join a radical, any kind of radical religious group or nationalistic group or any kind of radical organization. But contrarios are in our families, right? They're people that we love. They're people that are around us too. They're people that are people that are struggling with unresolved issues from the complexity of their past lives. And ultimately, the focus of this is really about assistance. So assistentiality is the key to para-reurbanisation, and that is an inner attitude, an inner intention for all of us to develop and to foster. It's the assistential task of our age. And this quote from Vieira, extraphysical, that's how I interpret that quote anyway. Extraphysical reurbanization is the beginning, the middle, and the end of everything we do here. We can contribute to it by multidimensional assistance through Penta, through having the intention to focus our out-of-body experiences on being of assistance to people in those dimensions, right? Human projectors are very important to the work of assisting people to leave stuck dimensions. But also really important because I think many of you can probably relate to the pressures that are being created in this world right now with many of the tragedies that are unfolding and many of the really confusing and confronting behavior in which people are relating to each other, is for us to foster inner serenity as a priority, to really examine and work with our own processes so that we can become centered and stable within the tumultuous world in which we are currently living, an intraphysical life. And so I'm going to jump now. I'm going to change topic. So I don't know if there's anything else, Ileana, that needs to be touched before on para-reurbanisation, before I start talking about Aboriginal culture and colonisation.
No, in my opinion, everything's fine. I think we can move forward. Let me see. We have some questions here. Yeah, let's enter into the Australian issues, and then I have a question from Tony Muskoff. Okay, because now that we introduced the main concepts of conscientiology, we are entering into the situation of Australia and talking about the Aboriginals, and then I'll have a question very soon. Can go on.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess I've been thinking about this topic for a long time, and I'm glad to say that I feel my thinking is continuously changing and becoming better from how it started. So I think that's always nice. Just seeing Tony's comment there about the waves of convicts as being transmigrated, really interesting. I haven't thought about that, for example, in that way. What I have thought about is, and why Australia is such a significant place to look at is that Australia was isolated from the rest of the world for a long time. Not completely isolated. There were some points of contact in the far north with places like Papua New Guinea and parts of Indonesia. But there's a substantial amount of the continent that had no contact with outside influences for 10,000 years at least. And before that, even, it's very unclear at this point exactly when, what migration might have happened, when it might happen. We know Aboriginal people have been here for at least 50,000 years. Whether along the way there was sometimes influence from the outside and so on, I don't know that we have any conclusive data on right now. But this map here is an indicative map. It's kind of currently the standard in Australia to give an indication of the various nations. It's a term that's sometimes used these days, as opposed to tribes, right? Sometimes people talk about language groups of Aboriginal people who were here before Europeans came. And this community was, as I say, very isolated. So in that context, in that sense, the interphysical community here shares that attribute with the extraphysical dimensions that have not had any contact with outsiders for a very long time. Just a few little details. Pre-colonization population, it's very difficult to estimate, but the estimation is around 500,000 people. People talk about around 250 distinct languages spoken across this continent. Very diverse, very different from places like New Zealand, for example, that had essentially a single language. Colonization started in Sydney in the sort of southeastern part in 1788. Very recent in the scheme of things, one of the most recent in that colonizations. And the reduction of the population by 1900 was almost, of the original Aboriginal population, was around 90%. So mass murder and disease wiped out pretty much 90% of the population as it was here. Today, the Aboriginal the Aboriginal population has returned to pre-colonization numbers, around about. And of course, now there's a different demographic in the sense that the Aboriginal people alive today, the vast majority, also have other heritage there. Today, last time I checked, as a first language of the original 250, we're now talking there are about 17 that are still left in communities where their language is the first language. And then in many other communities, their traditional language is used to different degrees as a second language, in part and so on.
Kim, I would like to mention now the Tony's Muskov question.
Yes.
Okay, it's a bit long. The question is made in 3 parts. I'm going to read to you and to the audience, okay? Hello, Kim. I see Australia's history copies Reurback's logic. Waves of convicts, conscripts were transmigrated from Europe to another world originally inhabited by Aboriginal people. Okay? In another part, the coexistence of these very different civilizations has generated conflicts, but also catalyzed the evolution of both colonized and colonizers. If both groups remained in their worlds, perhaps they would not have new evolutionary inputs. Could you please comment on my view on this? Do you understand what is the balance?
Yeah.
Good? Colonization was good?
Tony, you're jumping ahead. No, it's a very good comment and a very important question. And I will come back to that because I actually talk about it at the end.
Okay.
Essentially, I think the evolutionary opportunity of this situation really depends. No worries, mate. No worries. It really depends on the realization. It depends on how it's manifested. It depends on the actions that are actually taken. All right. So another point I'd just like to make quickly, because I think it's really important to understanding, is when you're looking at this timeline, 40,000 before present at the top here, we don't know much. Well, I don't know much myself now. I'm not a prehistorian of European history. But I know that what I do know is that we're largely confining ourselves to archaeology as we're trying to unpick what happened in Europe 20,000 years ago, 30,000 years ago. We know we had big changes starting around the 7,000 years with sedentary agriculture being introduced, metallurgy. We had the Roman colonization. There was a lot of movement. I think I saw here in one of the comments about Europe being a more open kind of environment. There was a lot more influence from Africa, from other parts of Asia into Europe, and exchanges and so on. Whereas in Australia, you can literally find people today in the outback who only met white people for the first time in their lifetime, and their parents had never met white people. And before that, for the least 10 or 20,000 years, people lived in the way that these people you meet today, their parents lived, right? People 20,000 years ago lived the same way. This is quite a unique situation, as far as I'm aware. And we really only have 225 years of external impact, which does go a bit towards your point, Tony. So I thought it would be helpful to just briefly outline some key points around Aboriginal culture that I think are just relevant to placing this community of people in the context of multidimensionality and how that fits together. And first thing I need to acknowledge around this slide here, in Australia, it's very common for us as non-Indigenous people to talk about Aboriginal people in a sort of collective sense, but actually each community here would consider themselves distinct, and be you can't just say a person from South Australia wouldn't say, well, I'm the same as this person from the top end in the Northern Territory or from somewhere in Queensland. That would be like saying, it's kind of like grouping all Europeans, right? But an Italian and a Finn might have a lot to say about kind of being lumped together in that way. So actually each of these images here is from a different part of Australia. In the bottom there, we've got the images of the Wandjina artwork from the Kimberley that I mentioned at the beginning. And so in the human life cycle here, consciousness comes from defined places in the ground, right? In country. Sometimes it's waterholes, sometimes it's caves. They are believed to be places where consciousnesses reside before they are born into a human body. And then this baby here is from Wiradjuri country in New South Wales. I just thought it was incredibly cute and needed to be shared around. And then these kids next to it, painted up for their initiation ceremony or for some in the community, are from Northeast Arnhem Land, Yolngu people. And then the elder down the bottom is a local here from Adelaide, Mugi Sumner, a friend and colleague with whom I've worked over the years. But what this represents is the general understanding which is shared across the country, is that consciousness starts in the ground, starts in country, comes into a human being who is forever linked throughout their life with the places where the consciousness is thought to have come from. Very close tie to the ground. there is this strong belief in perpetual learning. So it's a very learning-based culture, where people are always going through new understandings, and learning in the Aboriginal context has many different elements to it. But a large part of it is ceremonial, going through ceremonial processes. There's this idea that through the exposure to song and dance and ceremony, which are always related to places in the land, the human being, the consciousness, is exposed to the energies of this place and will be transformed because of that. Will become more mature. Will become more wise. And so Aboriginal societies are gerontocracies, so age is valued. Age is attributed with wisdom and with lots of ceremonial participation. And so then the elders can often in their lifetime become identified with the ancestors to whom they will return from where they came. So there's a cyclical perspective. But importantly, the cyclical perspective is within the community, right? There's within, you come from the country, you return to the country, and there's a strong sense at times of people being reborn who were ancestors, right? This idea that the ancestors are reborn in the community, which again provides that that sense of, to a certain extent, of a closedness from an evolutionary point of view. Yeah, there's more to, there's many. Aboriginal society is fundamentally multidimensional, so there's much that can be said about it. I did give an entire presentation at the International Week, I think it's online somewhere, about the multidimensional understanding of Aboriginal society, which I don't have time to go into right now, but it is really a fundamental aspect. But we want to look at what happened to this community when white people came. And yes, it was convicts who came, but it was also soldiers. And again, I don't want to minimize this process of colonization, but I was trying to think of tangible ways of how one can convey to people who don't have exposure to this, which people who are listening here for the most part probably did not. And I thought of this when you walk around Australia, especially after working with Aboriginal people, as I've had for many years, you really come to see how for traditional owners, the environment is the home, right? There's perfect familiarity with trees, with water sources, with natural resources. And people are moving around as if they're moving around their house in a way. And so if you imagine you're in your home and then suddenly this mob of people come in, beat you up, confine you to the laundry, eat all your food, take away your kids, you don't get to see them. Like, it's this kind of, these are the sort of experience you'd have to imagine to try and comprehend the impact of having these people rock up. And I sort of like the juxtaposition of the top one there. They come, they put a flag, and that's innocent enough. And there's images around Australia where you have this happen. You've got some Aboriginal people in the background kind of watching and trying to work out what the hell's going on. Who are these people? And then, but then what followed was what's in the other slide, right? Where in the other image there. So coming back to Tony's point around the evolutionary process, or the opportunities, I suppose, of this interaction. When I was preparing this presentation, it struck me that colonization is what happens when reurbanization is conducted by intruders. So in reurbanization, you have evolved consciousnesses who are, yes, they are moving consciousnesses out of the bubbles in which they were stuck, but it is done from a place of love and from a focus on their evolution, and it's done with support, and it's done in ways which I cannot pretend to fully understand. I do not, but I understand that the process is driven by this profound desire to assist the evolution of consciousness. Whereas here, people are coming and moving people out of their dimension, if you want, in which they've lived for thousands of years. But it's done for the desire for greed. It's done with violence, and there's absolutely no consideration of how this might impact on the people. And in preparing this, I also thought, I was thinking about how in many people with spiritual and religious ideas, they have this idea that these processes were like, religion was used as a justification for colonization, right? It was God's will that Europeans come and share the Bible with the world, right? Share the Christian, the good word, I think they call it, and the good word was often shared through guns and swords in Australia and elsewhere. And then there's ideas that we choose our suffering or anything painful and challenging that happens, that they are lessons that we have to learn in this life. But that really doesn't do justice to the complexity of interconsciential dynamics. So when we experience, as an individual, we experience a traumatic experience, somebody does us wrong, right? Somebody abuses us. Maybe we can take ourselves out of that and we can heal without having to do anything with that person. We never have to see them again, right? But we can move past that, heal the wounds in ourselves and so on. But when it comes to something like colonization, this kind of process needs to be mutual. It's not the same as healing from a personal assault. In large group relationships, reconciliation really has to come from both parties. Otherwise, it's not happening. And especially in a context where, in a colonial country like Australia and like many other places still, colonization is an ongoing process, right? It hasn't finished in the past. It's actually happening. If you're living in an Aboriginal community, it's happening today. You will find a mining company that's destroyed a site that's important to your family. You will have kids removed from you. You will have people making it difficult for you to maintain your language and all those kinds of things. So these are the impacts. This is the reality of colonization. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. It's kind of all the violence that you can imagine happening to people is what happens as part of colonization. I mean, bad food is an important piece because that has left a lasting legacy. When you look at images of Aboriginal people from early black and white photography in the 19th century, you see some of the healthiest people you can imagine, you know, strong, smiling, healthy looking. And within a very short period of time, that changed completely because people were deprived of their own food sources and basically just given flour, sugar, tea. That was the standard ration diet that Europeans gave Aboriginal people. We also have all these really profound impacts on people. I've already mentioned the population decline. The diet I just mentioned transformed some of the healthiest to some of the sickest peoples on Earth. Intergenerational trauma. So this is trauma that gets passed on down the generations from the early experience to today, which then becomes re-triggered over and over. Drug and alcohol abuse. There was no drug and alcohol before European colonization. The loss of cultural identity is a really profound experience, and then the fragmentation of communities. There's many more, right? You could extend this list. I don't want to spend that much time on it. I want to let me just quickly check. Yeah, so kind of trying to pull it all together. at the end, and then we'll have a bit of time for discussion, I hope. So para-reurbanisation is focused on extra-physical dimensions, and it impacts the intraphysical dimension. Colonisation is focused on the intraphysical dimension, taking of land, taking of resources. That's really what it's about. But it impacts the extraphysical dimension, and I haven't talked about that much. But it's interesting to think about because when consciousnesses came here, Europeans came here. They didn't. You had intraphysical people, but you also had extraphysical, of course, coming as well. And so what before was a long-standing extraphysical dimension of only Aboriginal people, now there is other dynamics happening. And I think it's worth pointing out that I would say that to this day in Australia, we have two distinct holothoscenes. There is one related to Aboriginal culture and Aboriginal people, which has an ancient history. And then you have kind of on top, kind of parallel to that, the holothoscene that was brought by Europeans and increasingly people from other parts of the world as well. So then para-reurbanisation is coordinated by helpers, it's assistential. And thinking about colonisation, so it's a complex process, and I focused on the intrusive parts, right? I focused on the violence, the colonial violence, which is at the front of it. But I think it is important to acknowledge that right from the very start, there was always people here who were Europeans, white people, who were also challenging and questioning and trying to curb the worst excesses of colonization. There was always humanists and religiously sort of leaders who were trying to stop and petition the government for better treatment of Aboriginal people. So it wouldn't be correct to say that everybody who arrived here were intruders. And I think there's actually a really complex interplay between different consciousnesses from different cultural backgrounds, which we won't have time to get back into, but it's important to acknowledge that.
To generalize, I can see to him that there are a lot of negative aspects you were pointing out that are very important. It's important that we say the truth. We say what really happened. We have that broader vision about the process of colonization. But it's important not to generalize, because everything has a positive aspect. Yes. And
yeah, nuance, right? Nuance is important. I agree. Yeah. And so finally, creating chaos. This is our perception intraphysically, right? That para-reurbanisation is bringing chaos. Our understanding is that in the long term, this will have positive change. Whereas colonisation had no positive intent, even though there was ideology, right? There was this ideology of we're bringing you civilization, we're bringing you the Bible, those kinds of things. But really, on the whole, the colonisers were indifferent to the impact. And again, bringing nuance, having spent a lot of time studying some of the missionaries here, the German missionaries in particular, I know that they genuinely believed that they were doing a good thing. So, yeah, but the question is, can an anti-cosmo-ethical process contribute to evolution? And that's going back to Tony's question, I think. And so here are some ideas about how we can transform intrusion to evolution. And at the core of it is, as Ileana just said, it's acknowledging the reality of and I actually will just quickly jump to this, because this is a display sign at a beach to the south of Adelaide, created by a local Aboriginal man, about truth telling, right? The importance of truth telling, and to find that the people who have been the ones that have been colonized to be the ones that are initiating and that are driving to and that are wanting to have dialogue. I think that is really a remarkable thing that's important to acknowledge. And I'll leave that up there, but I just want to go back to some of the aspects of how this might look. So one process that is happening in Australia, it's happening in many Indigenous communities, it's about repatriation. Repatriation of artifacts and repatriation of human remains, because Europeans and also Americans took human remains from across the world for the museums all over Europe and the Americas as part of their collections. And so there are many stories that there are extra-physical consciousnesses attached to these remains and also to the sacred objects and so on that were taken away. And communities are driving this return of these and the reburial of these remains. And the recurring theme is that this brings peace. It brings peace to the living and it brings peace to the consciexes. Acknowledgement of the past. Honest dialogue is emotional healing and reconciliation of conscience, but also of extra-physical consciousness. So intraphysical consciousness is conscience and consciex is extra-physical consciousnesses. And we need to be aware, and Aboriginal people are aware, right? Like they generally bring in the ancestors when they're doing this work. They generally act on behalf of the future generations and their ancestral generations. And for example, I've had, so I work with native title cases. There was an incident, or there was one of the cases where a group got native title. They had their land rights recognized, and some of the traditional owners of that country drove to an area on their country where there'd been a massacre and where they knew there was a lot of extra-physical consciousnesses from their community, and they read out parts of the determination that acknowledged them as the traditional owners of the country to share this with their own extra-physical ancestors. The importance of two-way learning. So I think this is where again, back to your point, Tony, about how we create evolutionary opportunities. There are things that European culture brings and that we've brought to this continent that are beneficial, that are good for life, that are life affirming and positive. And there are many things that our Aboriginal culture has that are beneficial. And for example, around connectedness to nature, around the importance of human connections, and around multidimensional living, right? And so this idea of learning from each other, that's true universalism. And it recognizes different kinds of intelligence. And it also understands that cultures are all expressions of consciousness. Understanding intergenerational trauma is really important, but also understanding that we have our own intergenerational, as in our own past life trauma from being perhaps subject to the processes of colonization ourselves or people that we're engaging with. That adds another dimension to the healing process. And then finally, the para-diplomacy, and I already touched on that. A bit just now with that story that I told. And in Australia, there's an important element. I say important. I think it's important. Some people think it's controversial or whatever, but that's the acknowledgement of country. So before we have events, before we have meetings, especially larger ones, important ones, there's generally an acknowledgement of the traditional owners of the place. And that is a small element of para-diplomacy. I guess most people doing it don't really realize it's para-diplomacy because they don't have that perspective. But nonetheless, if it's done from the heart, that is what it is. And but there are many other elements in which we could, I think, really engage with the extra-physical community as well as the interphysical community. All right, that's where I will leave it. And I hope there's a bit of time for some questions or comments. And you're muted again, Eliana.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. We have a question here from Jorn. Kim, you lived in Europe for a long time. How do you perceive oceanic pollution in Australia? Are there any differences?
Yeah, I think I find that the European Holocene is heavier. In Australia, I've been to certain locations of sort of stigmatized, I suppose, through many murders or deaths. That kind of in the context of working with Aboriginal people, and maybe also some other old places that have had long-standing ceremonial significance, where there is a strong Thorsenic pressure. But on the whole, coming to Australia, and more recently over the last few years, I've had the opportunity to move between more often again. Australia is much lighter, right? And I think it's a matter of population mass, and it's a matter of just not having had the literally thousands of years of warfare and essentially tribal kind of fighting that Europe has experienced.
Good. So I will post another comment from Jorn. And he's thanking Tony. I think Europe historically is an open system with changing borders. Australia is more like an island.
Oh, yeah.
That's what Jorn says. And he has another question. That is, how do you perceive the intercontinental cooperation, teamwork of the intermissivists at Reurbanisation in Australia? Do you have an example?
Well, this might be a good segue to this.
Yeah, it's a good connection to and for us to talk about the Australasian Pacific
Yes,
Conference.
yeah, because I would have to say that we're a very loose federation of volunteers here in in Australia, and I, I think a lot of, myself, Jeff, like most of the volunteers here have been involved in conscientiology for a long time, but in Australia we haven't really been very active physically with activities and so on. We are now organising this event, the first Australasian Pacific Conference on Para-Reurbanology and Serenology, from the 18th to the 20th of October here in Adelaide. Behind me is that one there. Yeah, that's the venue over my shoulder there, where this event will take place. And in organising this event, Jörn, I guess, as you probably know, when you start organising activities, you become more aware of processes and dynamics. And I've been really perceiving the precisely what you say there, the teamwork across continents, because we have people helping us in Brazil, in America, in the US, in different ways. People are contributing to this process, and it's really awakened in me, at least, this perception of group work, right? This many little pieces in the big maxi mechanism of creating something that we don't even know yet what it is, right? What this will contribute to this process.
I think it will be a great contribution. We will have in this conference a lot of many researchers, and I wanted you to talk about some of them. Who are going to present articles in this conference? Can you let us know a little bit about the researchers?
Yes, of course. Well, we have over a dozen speakers confirmed for this event, and it's largely sort of divided into the two themes. So we have pretty much an equal number of people talking about para-reurbanisation and about serenology. We have quite a few contributors from Australia, of course. Some of them are present here. Tony Muskopf, Tatiana Motta. We'll be talking about Serenissimus, Homo sapiens Serenissimus. Jeff Lloyd, another resident here, talk about Homo sapiens Serenissimus. I believe Luimara Schmidt, who just made a comment, will be here giving a paper. So we have a number of people coming from Brazil to present. And I guess I'd like to sort of give a shout out to a guest speaker, Dr. Roger Nelson, who is a consciousness researcher, very long standing at the Princeton University and the director of the Global Consciousness Project, who has kindly offered to, or agreed, we invited him through another speaker, Leonardo Paludetto, who is doing his PhD under Dean Radin. So Dean Radin is probably one of the most prominent parapsychology researchers these days. And through that connection, Leonardo knew about Roger's work. And Roger Nelson does the Global Consciousness Project, which is essentially goes right back to the beginning of this presentation. It looks at how we're all connected. And it's trying to, well, it is not trying, it is creating, it's developing scientific evidence of the way consciousness across the globe collectively impacts reality and impacts processes. So he's right out of a separate field, but he not related to conscientiology, but he has a really good perspective to offer, and I'm really looking forward to his contribution.
Good, very good, Kim. So if you guys that are watching us need more information about this conference, I will post here the Isaac website so that you can get to know more and subscribe and buy your ticket to Australia, because it's already time, okay? If you're interested in traveling to this amazing conference. Well, Kim, unfortunately, our time is over, and I would like to thank you very much. Thank for your great ideas, your knowledge, and communication, very clear communication, and to bring up this subject, this very important topic for us to get to know more about it. So I also thank the audience that watched us, and I will invite you all for our next lives. And the next live will be on April 28th, and at same time, 3 p.m. Brazil time. And we will have our first webinar in French with Fabiana Cerato, Ana Seno, and Marcelo Rouanet. They are going to talk about La Science de la Conscience. And on May 15th, we are going to have Amaury Pontieri and Ana Marcia Yogan talking about managing time and life prioritization. So people, stay tuned. And I would like to thank everyone again. Kim, would you like to say goodbye, some last words?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to say thanks to you, Liana, for inviting me. I loved this opportunity to reflect on these ideas again. I always find it really valuable to prepare something like this, because it makes me think about things. And I'd really like to thank everybody for who's joined, who tuned in, who asked questions, or who just watched. Appreciate your presence, and if we get to see you in Australia, that would be lovely. And if not, we are all connected and we will stay connected. So thank you very much.
Okay, so people, stay tuned. Thank you all, and happy evolutionary journey.